The night was raw, the kind that tore across the plains like a wild thing, snapping shutters and rattling doors. Maddox Boone had nothing left to give the world but his word, and even that felt thinner than the hide of his last starving steer. So when a young black girl showed up barefoot on his land, trembling against the cold and clutching her ribs like hunger itself had carved her hollow, he did the only thing he knew that might keep her alive. He took off his Stetson, the hat folks said was part of him the way bark belongs to a tree, pressed it into her hands and said, "Hold on to this till morning. Bring it back and I'll see you don't starve." He figured she'd vanish with the night, swallowed by the prairie winds that took everything else, but at sunrise she returned, hat clutched tight, a wagon at her back, and with it a fortune that would rattle Boone County to its bones. What no one knew, what Boone himself couldn't yet guess, was that the fortune came chained to a storm darker than any thunderhead that ever rolled across Kansas skies. Maddox Boone wasn't known for talking. He'd lost the habit the day he buried his wife, and in truth he hadn't much use for words since. He was 35, hard and weathered from sun and debt alike, living on a stretch of land that looked more like God's forgotten acre than a working ranch. His cattle were thin, his fences sagged, and his heart was near hollow. Most nights the only sound was the scrape of his boots on the porch or the low moan of wind through cottonwoods. Folks in town called him a man carved from stone, steady but cold. He wore that old Stetson like it was his last piece of armor, rim pulled low to keep out questions he didn't want asked. And if you'd asked him then whether he believed in promises, he might have spat in the dirt and said promises don't buy grain. But blood runs deep in a man, and Boone's daddy had told him long ago, "Your word's the only coin that don't lose value." Maddox didn't realize it then, but that coin was about to buy him more trouble than any debt collector ever could. That night Boone was out by lantern light working the north fence line when he saw her. She came down the wagon trail slow, swaying like her legs could barely hold her up. The lantern flame flickered against her face, sharp bones, eyes wide as a doe. She stopped a good 10 feet away when she saw him, like she expected to be turned back or worse. Boone rested the hammer he'd been swinging against the post and asked, quiet-like, "You lost, girl?" Her lips cracked when she spoke. "Ain't lost, just ain't got nowhere left." She was barefoot, dress torn, skin chafed raw by wind. Maddox could see the story plain as ink. Someone had run her near into the ground. He should have sent her on, most men would have back then, but instead he nodded toward the barn. "Get out the wind at least." Inside she perched on a hay bale, shivering. Boone set the lantern on a beam and studied her like he'd study a strange calf born in the night, fragile, maybe too far gone to save. "What's your name?" he asked. She shook her head hard. "Safer if you don't know." That sent a chill crawling under his skin. Boone wasn't a man to play nursemaid, but he also wasn't blind to hunger. The girl's hands were shaking, not from cold but from emptiness. He checked the loft, found nothing but half a sack of oats for the mule. Not near enough to share. And that's when he did something that surprised even him. He slid the Stetson off his head. That hat had seen him through drought, fire, and funerals. It was near the only thing he'd kept unbroken. He pressed it into her palms. The leather looked comically big against her thin wrist. "You hang on to this," he said. "Bring it back in the morning, and I'll see you get a hot meal." She blinked, confused. "Why would you give me this?" "Because a hat ain't just shade," Boone muttered. "It's a man's word made flesh. You bring it back, you'll know I meant mine." She held it like it was a crown, and for the first time that night, she gave him a look not just of fear but of trust. Back in the house, Maddox sat in the dark listening to the roof groan under the wind. He thought about her eyes, too sharp for her age, and about how foolish he was. What good was a promise when he barely had beans left to boil? By morning she'd be gone, Stetson pawned in town, and he'd be left bareheaded and poorer for it. But the words of his daddy kept gnawing. "Your word's the only coin." And Maddox knew, even if it meant going hungry himself, he'd find something for her to eat if she came back. The sky cracked gray and pink over the prairie when Maddox stepped outside. His boots scuffed frost off the porch boards. He squinted toward the barn, expecting nothing. But there she was, standing in the yard, Stetson clutched against her chest, and behind her, a wagon creaking down the ruts, drawn by a pair of weary mules. Boone froze. The bed was piled high with burlap sacks, lashed tight, the kind of load a man might see once in a lifetime if ever. "Lord Almighty," he whispered. The girl smiled faintly, lips trembling. Told you I'd be back. Didn't come empty. Boone's first thought wasn't gratitude, it was suspicion. Nothing on this earth came so sudden without a price. He stepped closer, lantern still in hand, though the sun was climbing. Where'd you get all that? The girl's eyes darted down. Don't ask, sir. Just know it's yours if you'll keep your word. Now if you'd been in Boone's boots, what would you have done? Take the bounty and thank God, or ask the questions that might bring hell to your door. Boone didn't know it yet, but whichever road he chose, the storm was already on its way, and that's where the tale for that wagon didn't just carry sacks, it carried the kind of secret that could burn a town to ash. Maddox Boone had promised a girl his hat. By keeping that promise, he was about to inherit more fortune, and more danger, than any rancher in Boone County ever had. Maddox Boone had seen many things in his years: stampedes, prairie fires, drought that split the ground like broken glass, but he had never in all his days seen a wagon roll into his yard, piled high like burlap sacks, stretched tall above the rails, tied down with hemp rope, mules heaving against the weight. He couldn't count the sacks from where he stood, but it was enough to buy feed for every ranch in Boone County twice over. Enough to pay off debts that had been shackling his neck for years. But fortune never just walks into a man's yard. Boone's gut told him there was trouble stitched into every seam of those bags. The girl clutched his Stetson like a relic, her thin frame stiff against the morning chill. Boone's first words weren't thanks, they were suspicion. Where in God's name did you come by this? Her jaw trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. I told you I'd be back, sir. I kept your hat. I kept your promise. Don't make me tell you more than that. Boone's fists flexed against his sides. Every rancher he knew would have lunged at that wagon. Claimed it as providence, no questions asked. But Maddox Boone was cut different. His mind spun. If I take it, what kind of storm follows? If I turn it away, do I send this girl back into the wind to die? The sacks called to him salvation and ruin. Wrapped in the same coarse cloth, he stepped forward, yanking the cover off the nearest bag. Grain spilled through the seams, pale and fine. Wheat, but when he dug deeper, his fingers struck something hard, metallic. He fished it out, a silver coin. Boone's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Not one coin. Dozens, maybe hundreds, if the weight of that wagon was true. The girl's voice shook. Please, sir, just take it inside before someone sees. Boone glanced toward the ridge. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, but dust already shimmered on the trail a mile out. Riders. His blood chilled. He dragged the mule team into the barn himself, boots grinding the frozen dirt. The girl scrambled behind, pulling the wide doors shut. Boone tore off the top and shoveled grain back into split seams, hiding the glint of silver. By the time the riders crested the ridge, the yard looked bare again, quiet as any morning. Boone stepped out onto the porch, arms folded, trying to look casual. 3 men came down the track, not neighbors. Boone knew every rancher within 20 miles, and these weren't them. Their horses were lathered, their faces hard. The lead rider tipped his hat with a smile too sharp to be friendly. Morning. Fine. Spread you got here. Boone's voice stayed even. Ain't much fine about it. What brings you out this way? Looking for a wagon, the rider said. His gaze slid past Boone toward the barn. Heavy wagon, pulled by a pair of mules. You seen anything like that? Boone's gut twisted, but his face didn't change. Not this morning. Roads have been quiet. The man's smile thinned. Funny. Someone said they saw tracks heading this way. Boone shrugged. Tracks wander. Wind carries dust. Can't trust your eyes on this land. The rider studied him, eyes narrowing. Then he leaned back in the saddle. If you do see such a wagon, best let folks know. Belongs to men who won't take kindly to losing it. They turned and rode slow toward the ridge, never once looking away until distance swallowed them. Boone stood frozen until the last speck of dust faded. Then he yanked the barn door open. The girl was crouched in the shadows, clutching his hat to her chest, shaking so hard the crown quivered. You want to tell me what in hell you've dragged onto my land? Boone's voice was low, dangerous. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I couldn't carry it alone. I thought if I got it to someone honest, Maybe it means something besides blood. Blood. Boone barked. You telling me folks died for this? She nodded, slow. They weren't good men. But they were men with guns. They took what wasn't theirs for years. Last night, they took too much. I took it back. Boone stared at a girl no older than 16, standing in his barn, telling him she'd robbed killers. And now those killers were hunting. If Boone turned her out, the riders would track her down before sundown. If he kept her here, he painted a target on his back, big as the barn itself. The choice felt like a noose tightening, but he remembered the way she'd handed him back his hat, cradled like it was holy. He remembered the weight of his own words. A man's word is coin. You understand what you've done, he growled. You didn't just steal grain and silver. You brought their war to my doorstep. Her lip trembled, but she stood tall. Better your doorstep than a grave, sir. And I kept my promise. Now you keep yours. Boone swore under his breath. By midday, Boone had the wagon hidden deep in the far shed, covered with hay bales. He scattered tracks, burned the torn burlap sacks, and set his rifle by the porch. The girl, still nameless, still skittish, helped as best she could, though her hands shook too much to tie proper knots. He asked her again for her name. She hesitated long, then whispered, Clara. Boone nodded once. Clara, you best understand. Men like that don't give up. They'll come back. And if they find what's in that wagon, they'll kill us both. Her gaze sharpened. Then we don't let them find it. That evening Boone lit no lantern. The house sat dark, rifle across his lap. Clara, curled on the rug, hat pulled low over her brow, too tired to keep her eyes open. Every creak of the wind made Boone's finger twitch. He thought of the silver hidden under hay, thought of the riders' cold smiles. He knew the land gave nothing free. Whatever Clara had brought him, it carried a price, and when hoofbeats echoed faint across the night, Boone knew the reckoning was already on its way. By dawn, the riders would return, and this time, they wouldn't be asking polite questions. Boone had a girl under his roof, a fortune hidden in his shed, and enemies circling like wolves. He'd given his word, and his word bound him to her. But promises have a way of costing more than a man can pay. The prairie was quiet at first light, but Maddox Boone had lived long enough to know when silence was wrong. No meadowlark calls, no coyotes yipping in the gullies, just a stillness that pressed against the skin. He rose from the porch rocker, rifle heavy in his grip. Clara stirred where she lay, curled by the hearth inside, Boone's old hat covering her eyes. She blinked awake as though her bones felt the same wrongness. Then came the sound, faint at first, then sharper. Hoofbeats. Not one horse. Several. Boone stepped into the yard, his jaw tight. The 3 riders from yesterday were back, and they hadn't come alone. 5, this time maybe 6, dust trailing behind them like a banner. They rode up bold, no pretense of courtesy this time. The lead man, same sharp smile cutting across his face, reined in his bay gelding just 10 yards off the porch. Mornin' rancher, he called. Reckon we left things unfinished yesterday. Boone kept his rifle low but ready. If you're looking for more lies, I don't have 'em to give. The man's grin vanished. We ain't looking for lies. We're looking for what's ours. A wagon full of wheat and silver came this way last night. Boone's heart kicked but his face didn't move. And if it, then you'd best hand it over, or we'll take it off your land along with whatever's left standing. Before Boone could answer, the door creaked open. Clara stepped out, barefoot, Boone's hat still too big for her small head. Her voice was soft, but it carried. It ain't your, none of it. You stole it. You bled good folks for it. And now it's taken. The men's heads snapped toward her. Boone's stomach turned cold. The lead rider laughed, a sound without warmth. Well, if it ain't the little thief herself. Thought you could run far, did you? Thought you could hide behind this rancher's skirts? Boone raised his rifle. She's under my roof now. You want her, you'll cross me first. The men shifted in their saddles, hands twitched near pistols. Boone's thumb eased the rifle's hammer back, the click echoing in the stillness. He knew he couldn't outgun them all, not in the open, but sometimes a man's nerve counted more than his bullets. Get off my land, Boone said, voice like gravel. Next step closer. One of you won't be riding back. The lead rider studied him long, then spat in the dust. "You're making a poor wager, rancher. That girl ain't worth dying over." Boone's jaw tightened. "That's my choice, not yours." A tense beat passed. Then, with a sharp tug on the reins, the man wheeled his horse. "Fine. We'll leave you for now. But don't think you've scared us off. You can't hide her forever. We'll be back. And when we come, you won't be enough to stop us." They rode off, dust boiling in their wake. Boone didn't lower the rifle until they were specks against the horizon. Inside, Clara sank to the floor, trembling. Boone leaned the rifle against the wall, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You near got us both killed," he muttered. She looked up, eyes wet but steady. "They already knew, sir. They saw me yesterday. There was no hiding. Better they heard the truth." Boone stared down at her, torn between fury and reluctant respect. She had more steel in her bones than most grown men. Still his voice was hard. "You don't speak again when wolves are at the door. You let me do the talking." She lowered her gaze but didn't apologize. That night, Boone lit the lantern low and set beans boiling in the pot, his last decent meal until he figured something out. Clara sat at the table, thin hands wrapped around a tin cup. He watched her a long while before asking, "You gonna tell me the whole of it?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began. "They call themselves the Greaves boys. Ain't brus, not by blood, but close enough in cruelty. They've been running the back roads for months. Robbing, burning, killing. Folks too poor to fight back." Her eyes hardened. "Last week they came to the settlement I was with, took near everything. Folks begged, but Greaves don't hear begging. My papa tried to stop him. They shot him down, shot my mama when she screamed. I hid. I watched." Boone's stomach knotted. They loaded the wagon with grain, with silver they'd hoarded, with every scrap worth carrying. After they slept, drunk on their own spoils, I cut the mules loose. Drove the wagon out. Didn't stop till I saw your lantern." Boone sat in silence, the crackle of beans the only sound. He had no wife anymore, no children, no family left. And yet hearing her speak of parents gunned down, of homes stripped bare, it clawed at the hollow in his chest. "You understand," he said finally. "You didn't just steal their silver. You stole their pride. Men like that don't stop till they take it back or bleed for it." Clara's chin lifted. "Then let him bleed." Boone almost smiled despite himself. She was young, raw, but she had fire. Fire that could burn bright or burn them both to ash. Over the next days Boone worked like a man possessed. He reinforced the barn doors, dug trenches near the porch, stashed rifles where he could reach them quick. He sent Clara to gather water and firewood, teaching her how to keep watch without being seen. The wagon stayed hidden in the shed, hay piled high over its secret. But Boone knew the Greaves boys weren't fools. They'd come with more men next time. Maybe with torches, maybe with blood already on their hands. At night Boone lay awake listening to Clara's quiet breathing by the hearth. He wondered why fate had set this girl on his land, why his hat had become a bond between them. He wasn't sure if it was luck, curse, or both. One evening as the sun bled red across the prairie, Boone saw smoke on the horizon. Not from his land, but from the town 10 miles east. Too much smoke. He cursed under his breath. The Greaves weren't just circling. They were striking, burning to send a message. Clara came to his side, eyes wide. "They're coming, aren't they?" Boone nodded grimly. "A storm's building, girl, and it's headed straight for us." That night, Boone set his rifle across his knees and stared into the dark, knowing tomorrow might bring fire to his doorstep. Clara had brought him a fortune, yes, but she'd also brought him a war. And when the Greaves boys returned, they wouldn't come for silver alone. They'd come for revenge. The smoke from town carried a smell that Boone would never forget. Scorched wood and burned flesh riding the wind. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth when it reached them, her eyes wide and wet. "They're making a point," Boone muttered. "Ain't just about the silver anymore. They're telling every soul in Boone County, cross us, and we'll burn you down." Clara's voice cracked. "Then they'll come here next." Boone didn't answer, but his silence was worse than worse. Boone saddled his mare at dawn and rode into town, Clara hidden in the loft until he returned. The place was a ghost. Half the main street still smoked, charred frames leaning where homes had been. Folks picked through rubble with hollow eyes. Sheriff Harlan met him by the well, hat low, jaw tight. "You seen what they did?" Boone asked. "I seen it," the sheriff said, "but I ain't got men enough to stop 'em. Greaves rolled 10 deep, maybe more. What do I got? 3 deputies and a town full of folks who'd rather hide than fight." Boone's hands curled into fists. "So you'll just let 'em burn us all?" Harlan's gaze flicked up. "Word is they're after a wagon. Came through last week. You know anything about that?" Boone's stomach tightened. "No wagon here." The sheriff studied him too long. Then he shook his head. "If you're lying, Boone, you'll drag us all into hell. I can't protect you. I won't." Neighbors turned their faces away as Boone rode back out. He felt the weight of their stares, suspicion, fear, resentment. Clara hadn't just brought the Greaves' wrath to his wrath. She'd turned the whole county against him. Back home, Boone set to work. He boarded windows, stacked sandbags near the porch, dragged water barrels close. Clara carried what she could, silent but determined. "You ever shoot a rifle?" Boone asked her one evening, handing her his old Winchester. Her hands trembled as she held it. "Papa taught me some. Before," she swallowed hard, "before they shot him. Boone showed her how to sight proper, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. She practiced until her shoulder bruised purple." "Good," Boone said at last. "When they come, you don't aim to scare. You aim to live." Clara nodded, eyes fierce. It came 2 nights later. Boone woke to the horses screaming in the barn. He grabbed his rifle, shoved boots onto bare feet, and ran into the yard. Flames licked the barn roof. Shadows moved in the firelight, riders circling, whooping like demons. Boone fired, the crack splitting the night. One rider toppled from his horse. The others scattered, but not far. Bullets ripped into the porch posts, splinters flying. Clara crouched beside Boone, clutching the Winchester. "Stay low," Boone barked. A Molotov jar shattered against the side of the house. Fire climbing fast. Boone cursed, rolled a barrel and doused it, steam hissing into the air. The riders retreated only when dawn bled across the horizon. Boone's barn was half cinder, 3 cattle dead, but Clara was alive, and the wagon still hidden. She wiped soot from her face, trembling. "They'll be back, stronger." Boone's jaw tightened. "Then so will." Later that day, as Boone checked the fence line, he spotted a rider coming slow across the ridge. He leveled his rifle until he saw the white flag tied to the man's saddle. It was Ezra Tate, a drifter Boone had played cards with in town years back. Ezra was rough, scar down one cheek, but Boone remembered him as a man who hated bullies. "Heard Greaves lit you up last night," Ezra said, dismounting. "Words traveling. Folks say you're sitting on their treasure." Boone's eyes narrowed. "You here to take a share?" Ezra shook his head. "I ain't greedy, Boone, but I don't stomach men like Greaves. Figured you could use another gun when they come knockin'." Boone didn't trust him, not fully, but he was too short on allies to turn one away. That night, Clara sat by the hearth, hat in her lap, staring into the flames. Boone sensed she had words bottled up tight. Finally, she whispered, "It weren't just chance I found you, sir. I heard folks talk in town," said Maddox. Boone was the only man kept his word, even when it broke him. "That's why I brought the wagon here. I knew if you promised, you'd stand." Boone felt a weight settle in his chest. Her faith in him was heavier than any silver. He wasn't sure he deserved it. "Girl," he said rough, "you tied your rope to a man half broke, but I reckon I'll hold as long as I can." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's enough." Ezra proved handy with a rifle. He scouted ridges, patched fences, taught Clara tricks Boone hadn't thought to. But Boone kept noticing how Ezra's eyes lingered on the shed where the wagon lay buried under hay. One evening Boone caught him near it, lantern in hand. Looking for something. Boone's voice was steel. Ezra raised both palms. "Easy. Just making sure you got it hid prop." Boone didn't lower his rifle. "Stay away from that shed." Ezra smiled thin. "All right, Boone, but you know as well as I do, silver like that don't stay hid forever." Boone didn't sleep much that night. Between Greaves circling and Ezra sniffing at secrets, danger pressed in on all sides. 3 nights later the Greaves boys returned in force. 10 riders this time, torches blazing, guns spitting fire. Boone, Clara and Ezra took their positions. Bullets slammed into the house. Clara fired from the upstairs window, dropping 1 rider clean. Boone blasted another off his horse from the porch. Ezra's rifle cracked sharp, keeping the rest from charging straight in. But they were relentless. Torches flew, flames licked the porch. Boone fought them back with water, lungs choking on smoke. Through the chaos, Boone saw the leader, Greaves himself, scar-faced and grinning in the torchlight. He raised his pistol and shouted, "Boone, you got something that belongs to me. Hand it over, or I'll burn you to the ground." Boone's reply was a bullet that shaved the man's hat clean off. Greaves howled, rallying his men. Then burn it all. The night turned to hellfire. By dawn, Boone's ranch was blackened ruin, but the shed still stood. The wagon still hid. Greaves had been beaten back for now but not broken. Worse yet, Boone couldn't shake the sight of Ezra's eyes during the fight, not on the riders but on the shed. And Boone knew, the next battle wouldn't just be against Greaves, it might be against the man inside his wall. By the time the sun cracked over the horizon, Boone's ranch looked half dead. The barn was a blackened carcass, the porch rails charred, the air heavy with smoke. Clara sat on the steps, soot streaking her cheeks. Boone's Stetson tilted low to hide the tears she swore she wouldn't cry. Ezra leaned against the water trough, cleaning his rifle. He whistled low, "We bloodied 'em, Boone, but they'll be back. Ain't no way men like Greaves let it go after a licking like that." Boone stood silent, surveying the wreck. He knew Ezra was right. Greaves had tasted defiance, and wolves only get hungrier once they smell blood. The question wasn't if they'd return, it was when. That afternoon Boone caught Ezra again by the shed. This time, the man wasn't even hiding it. He leaned against the door, chewing a splinter like it was a toothpick, his eyes glittering. "You're sitting on a king's ransom, Boone," Ezra drawled. "Silver enough to buy soldiers, land, power, and you're wasting it hid under hay like a scared calf." Boone's voice was gravel. "Ain't mine to spend. It came here on a girl's back, and my word tied me to it." Ezra chuckled. "Your word's gonna get you dead. Greaves won't stop, but you and me, we could haul that wagon south, trade it clean, vanish before the smoke clears." Boone leveled his eye. "Trend, leave Clara to swing." Ezra spat the splinter into the dirt. "She ain't your kin, ain't your blood. She's just weight dragging you under." Boone stepped closer, his height casting Ezra in shadow. "Weight or not, she's under my roof, and I'll carry her till I drop. That's the difference between us." Ezra's smile thinned, sharp as a blade. Boone knew then, the man wasn't a friend. He was a wolf circling, waiting for the right moment. That night Clara sat by the embers, clutching Boone's hat in her lap. She spoke without looking up. "They'll kill you for me, won't they?" Boone hesitated. "They'll try. I don't want that," she whispered. "I don't want more blood on me." Boone knelt beside her. "Girl, you didn't bring blood. You brought a choice, and I made mine. Don't carry the weight that belongs on my shoulders." She lifted her eyes, sharp through the tears. "Then teach me. If I've got to fight, I'll fight beside you." Boone saw it plain. She wasn't the broken child who'd stumbled onto his land. She was hardening into something else, something fierce. 3 days later, a rider came alone, bearing a white cloth. Boone met him at the gate, rifle loose in his hands. The man's voice was mocking. "Message from Greaves. He says he'll give you 1 chance to live. Hand over the wagon by sundown tomorrow, and he'll let you keep the ground you're standing on. Refuse." The rider grinned. "Well, you seen what he did to town." Boone's jaw clenched. "Tell Greaves I don't bargain with thieves." The rider laughed, wheeled his horse, and was gone. Clara stepped out of the shed's shadow, her face pale. "He'll come with everything, won't he?" Boone nodded grim. "With everything." That night, Boone woke to a sound, soft but wrong. The creak of the shed door. He grabbed his rifle, slipped into the yard. The moon cut silver across the dirt. Ezra stood at the wagon, lantern lit, rope already tied to the mules. "Ezra," Boone growled. Ezra spun, pistol flashing up. Sorry, Boone, I ain't dying for some girl's vengeance. Greaves'll take this silver one way or another. Better he owes me for handing it back than I owe him my blood. Boone's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Clara's voice cut sharp from the shadows. You'd sell us out to murderers, she spat. She was holding the Winchester, sights leveled dead on Ezra. Ezra sneered. Little girl, you don't got the stones. Boone barked. Clara, don't. Ezra lunged for the reins. The shot cracked before Boone could stop it. Ezra staggered, lantern falling, fire spilling across the hay. He crumpled in the dirt, blood spreading dark. The shed caught flame fast, sparks racing up the timbers. Boone dragged Clara back as the blaze roared. By the time the fire died, the shed was ash, and with it, the wagon, the grain, the silver. Gone. Clara stared at the ruins, shaking. I didn't mean to. Boone laid a hand on her shoulder. You did what you had to. Ezra made his choice. Now we make ours. With the silver gone, Boone knew Greaves wouldn't believe it. He'd come anyway, for blood if not for treasure. So Boone prepared for the end. He dug shallow trenches, laid what powder and shot he had left, stationed Clara with her rifle in the loft. When the sun fell, the horizon bloomed with torches. Greaves came with 15 men, fire reflecting off gun barrels. They surrounded the ranch like a pack of wolves. Greaves rode to the front, scarred face twisted with rage. Boone, he bellowed, you think you can spit in my eye? Where's my wagon? Boone stepped into the yard, rifle at his shoulder. Burned to ash, like you'll be if you take one more step. Greaves' laughter was harsh. Then you die for nothing. The night exploded. Gunfire tore the dark. Clara's rifle cracked from the loft, dropping one man clean. Boone's shots boomed, driving back the charge. But they came relentless, bullets shredding boards, torches hurled against what was left of the barn. Boone fought like a man already dead, steady and grim, each pull of the trigger echoing his oath. Clara reloaded, hands trembling but sure, firing again and again. Bodies fell, horses screamed, smoke thickened until the world was fire and thunder. Through the chaos, Greaves pushed forward, pistol blazing. He stormed the porch, bellowing, "Your word ain't worth spit, Boone. You should have handed her over." Boone swung his rifle up, but the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Greaves grinned, pistol ready. Then Clara screamed, "No!" Her shot rang out. Greaves staggered, blood blooming across his chest. He fell heavy on the porch boards, eyes wide in disbelief. The fight broke, the rest scattered, dragging their wounded, howling in fury but broken in spirit. By dawn only silence remained. Boone slumped against the porch rail, bleeding from a shoulder wound he hadn't felt till now. Clara dropped beside him, hands frantic against the blood. "Don't you die," she begged. "Don't you dare." Boone's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Reckon I kept my promise, girl. You brought me my hat. I saw you fed, and I didn't let the wolves take you." Tears blurred her eyes. "But the silver, it's gone." "Silver don't matter," Boone rasped. "What matters is you standin'." His eyes closed, breath slowing. Weeks later, Boone County whispered about the night Maddox Boone held off Greaves and his pack. Some said he died on that porch, rifle in hand. Others swore he lived, scarred but unbroken. Nobody knew for certain. But one thing was sure. Clara walked into town with his hat on her head and fire in her eyes. She carried no silver, no wagon, only the story of a man who kept his word when every other man turned away. And that story proved worth more than gold. Folks who'd once shut their doors now opened them. A preacher took her in, neighbors offered work, even the sheriff bowed his head when she passed. In time, Clara grew into a woman known across the plains, the girl who'd stolen from killers, survived fire, and carried the honor of Maddox Boone in her blood. And the hat, she never let it go, worn brim, sweat-stained band. It was more than leather. It was the weight of a promise kept, the kind of fortune no fire could burn. Now, if you'd been there, standing on that porch with smoke stinging your eyes and the smell of gunpowder thick in your lungs, you might have wondered the same thing folks still whisper about today. Did Boone's hat bind that girl to survival, or did her fire save Boone from the grave? The truth lies somewhere in between. What matters is that on one hard night on the Kansas plains, a rancher gave a starving girl his hat, and by dawn, she returned not just with fortune, but with the fight to keep it. And sometimes that's all history is: one promise, one stand, one hat passed from a dying man to a girl who refused to bow.